Good morning. I'm going to read 3 short passages from Ecclesiastes. So first, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 2 to 11. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What does man gain from his labor, at which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. But what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, "Look, this is something new. It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time." There is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. Next, Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. I thought in my heart, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish, and what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone else in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well, the delights of the heart of man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all of this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. And then chapter 4, verses 1 to 3. Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they had no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not been, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun.
Good morning. Can you all hear me okay? Good. It's wonderful to be with you all here again. I had a really wonderful time when I was here last September. I was excited to come back again and enjoy Gabriola Island. I tell you, it smells good here. I don't know, in Toronto, you don't have that good smell of nature and burning wood and things like that. I know that's not a funny thing, but I really enjoy that, just walking around. You know, I came on a plane here, as you might expect, and I was thinking of a story of Muhammad Ali. If you know who he was the great boxer and loved to talk about how great he was. Of course, he had all those great little quips, like float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. So, you can maybe forgive him sometimes for self-aggrandizement, just talking about how wonderful he was. Anyway, there's a story one time of him being on an airplane. And the plane was about to land, so the flight attendant said, "Mr. Ali, you have to put your seatbelt on." And he looked at her and said, "Superman don't need no seatbelt." And she looked at him without skipping a beat and said, "Yes, but Superman don't need no airplane." I have to confess, I need an airplane. I wouldn't be able to come here apart from that. Well, in the passages that we read this morning, Solomon talks about life. He steps back from the rat race of just doing things on a daily basis. And he says, what is the purpose of this all? Why are we here? We wake up, we eat, we do our day, we go to bed. He steps back and he wonders, what is the meaning of this all? Why are we doing all of this? And wise men all throughout history have stepped back from their lives and they said, I do these things day in and day out, but what is it all about? What is the meaning of life? In the 17th century, the great French intellect Blaise Pascal stepped back from the daily activities of life and he reflected on the condition of mankind. And this is how he explained it. He said, I see the terrifying immensity of the universe which surrounds me and find myself limited to one corner of this vast expanse without knowing why I am set down here rather than elsewhere, nor why the brief period appointed for my life is assigned to me at this moment rather than another in all the eternity that has gone before me and will come after me. On all sides I behold nothing but infinity, in which I am a mere atom, a mere passing shadow that returns no more. All I know is that I must soon die. But what I understand least of all is this very death which I cannot escape. As I know not whence I come, so I know not whither I go. Such is my condition, full of weakness and uncertainty. I spend a lot of time interacting with atheists. I have a Facebook page called Mars Summit, and a lot of times I interact with them, and we disagree about so many different things. But one thing I often find atheists will acknowledge, and that is that if there is no God, there is no ultimate purpose or meaning to life. And this is something that the great atheists throughout history have acknowledged it. The famous Oxford philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell acknowledged this. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche talked about this in his work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Steven Weinberg, who won a Nobel Prize in physics, says that from his atheistic perspective, the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless. In the late 1800s, scientists discovered the laws of thermodynamics, and they realized that all of the energy in the universe is dissipating, entropy is increasing. And they realized that all the energy stored in the suns will one day burn out, and all of the life on the planets, not just our planet, but any planet in the universe, will eventually die off. And after the stars burn out, they will all coalesce into black holes. But then even these black holes, because of Hawking radiation, will eventually dissipate out. And the whole universe will consist of nothing but tiny subatomic particles separated by distances that are too vast for the mind to conceive. And all life everywhere will have long extinguished itself. There will be nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Is it any wonder that Albert Camus once said that the only truly serious philosophical problem was suicide? Whether life was worth living or not was the fundamental question, and all other questions flowed out from that. On an atheistic worldview, the situation is very bleak. You might say, if you're an atheist, why bother living? But atheists say not to worry. Even though there is no ultimate purpose to life, no ultimate meaning, that doesn't mean we can't invent a purpose for our life. We can create some purpose and derive meaning from that. Of course, critics say, if you would just invent a purpose or meaning, that's no purpose or meaning at all. You might as well just pretend there's a Santa Claus around Christmas time because it makes your life feel better. On the internet, you can find an organization called the Voluntary Human Extinction Movement. And this whole movement is a serious movement that tries to persuade people to stop procreating. They want to see the human race go extinct. And they talk about how wonderful it will be if the whole human race is gone. Imagine all the plants and animals that will be able to flourish when we stop killing them and stop preventing them from growing. And they can make it sound all very nice and convincing. But you have to stop and think when you hear about this. Does it really matter that human beings exist? If the human race never existed, would it make a difference? If all life on Earth never existed and the Earth never existed as a planet, would it make any difference? The World Health Organization says that in the last half century, the rate of suicide in the world has gone up 60%. It now accounts for more than half of all violent crimes, more than all the deaths from homicide and wars combined together. About 1 million people a year commit suicide, and that works out to about 3,000 people a day. Think about that for a moment. Today, 3,000 people around the world will take their lives. It's so serious that the WHO has declared September 10th be World Suicide Prevention Day. You know, if you're an atheist and you say that you acknowledge that there's no ultimate purpose to life, no ultimate goal, then there is no rational basis for you to tell somebody else who wants to commit suicide that they should not. All you can do is say, I have chosen not, I prefer not to, and I would like it if you didn't, but you can't have any rational basis to say that they should not commit suicide. If the purpose of life is something that you just arbitrarily choose, then why does it matter whether you've chosen to live a long, full life or end it early on? Sam Harris, one of the so-called new atheists, talks about in one of his books, The Moral Landscape, how he had an acquaintance that wrote an email to himself and other people. And this acquaintance said, you know, we're all going to die sometime. I might as well get it done sooner rather than later. And to his credit, Sam Harris worked to try to convince this person not to commit suicide. And seemed that he was successful at first, only to find out a few years later this man took his life. Now, although Sam Harris worked to convince this person not to commit suicide, we have to note that on an atheistic worldview, there's no rational basis for him to say, you should live a long life. All he can say is, I have wanted to live a long life, and I would like it if you did. But there's nothing beyond that. There's a story about, there was kind of a joke or a story about a hippie. We'll say he's American. He lives in the 60s or 70s because that's when hippies lived. Except for a few that have stuck around. And he's searching for the meaning and purpose in life. So he decides he's going to go to India because, of course, if you're a hippie, that's where you go for answers for like that kind of thing. And once he gets to India, he's asking around for the purpose of life, and he finds out that there is this very old and deeply revered guru who has the answers to the questions he's looking for. The only problem is that no one knows where this guru is. He's somewhere off in the Himalayas, meditating all by himself. Well, this is discouraging, but the young hippie, he's undaunted. So he decides to go into the Himalayas and search for this guru. And day after day, month after month, year after year, he's searching for the guru. And finally, one day, he sees this old man, the guru, meditating at the mouth of a cave far up a mountain. So very quickly he starts to climb this mountain, and he's climbing and climbing, and he's so excited. And he gets to the mouth of the cave, and he's exhausted, but he's trembling with excitement. And he sits down in front of the guru, and he says, "Oh Guru, what is the meaning of life?" And the guru sits there serene, unflinching, not even noticing that the young hippie is sitting in front of him. And after a long pause, he says, "Life is a fountain." And the hippie hears him, and he waits, and he's thinking, there's got to be something more. Life is a fountain. What else? What's the meaning of life? And after a long pause of waiting, he says, "Yes, yes, and what else?" And suddenly the guru pops open his eyes and says, "What? You mean it's not a fountain? You see, there's something inside each one of us that longs, that senses that there is something more to life. There is a purpose and meaning to life that is not simply invented in our minds. But you know, if Solomon is correct, if you think about the position of no God, then everything is just meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Without God, there is no objective purpose or meaning to life. And there is no objective morality either. In the book Alice in Wonderland, Alice is walking along a path, and she suddenly gets to a fork in the road and meets a Cheshire cat. She's wondering which way to go, so she asks the cat, which direction should I take? Which path should I take? And the cat says, well, it all depends on where you want to end up. What is your goal? She says, well, I don't know where I want to end up. I don't know where my goal is. And he says, well, then it doesn't matter which path you take, because every path will take you somewhere. You see, if there is no ultimate purpose to life, then you can create any purpose you want, and then many different paths can take you to many different places. If you desire to become a great athlete, say you want to win an Olympic medal, then there's a certain path that you will take to reach that goal that you've chosen in life. You'll do a lot of physical exercise, you're going to eat well. On the other hand, if you want to be a great scientist and win a Nobel Prize, then there's other things that you are going to do. You're going to spend time studying and learning and talking to scientists in order to achieve that goal. But if your goal is to be a great athlete, it makes no sense to tell the person who wants to be a great scientist that they should do the things that you are doing, because you have a different goal altogether. The problem with atheism is that if you have a particular goal that's arbitrary, then the path that you take there is going to line up with that goal. And if you don't agree with the morality that is involved in that path, you have no rational basis to tell someone else that they should take a different path. Sam Harris, in that book, The Moral Landscape, tries to make morality objective by saying that the whole goal of morality is the flourishing of all conscious creatures. And he says we can objectively determine how to get to that goal. But the problem is that that goal is an arbitrary one. There's nothing outside of the mind of Sam Harris that makes that the right goal for everybody. So there's no morally binding reason that people should follow the moral standards that Sam Harris might lay out. When I was a child, we visited my relatives in Czechoslovakia, or what is now the Czech Republic. My mother comes from there. And we had some time, so we decided to go to Poland, and we visited Auschwitz. And of course, I don't remember that place very well. But I do remember walking around in a particular building, and they had these rooms with glass walls. And inside, you could find the remains of people who had been killed there. You could find one room filled with glasses that had been taken from the dead bodies of the people who died. And you could find another room filled with hair that was shorn from the corpses of the people who died. It's a very sobering experience to be there, and it reminds you of the millions of people who died. But it also makes you think that if you're Adolf Hitler and your goal is to have a strong German race that's purified of all the Jewish, Slavic, gypsies, handicapped people, if that is your goal, to have a pure Aryan race, and there's a particular path that you follow in order to reach that arbitrary goal. And there's no rational basis on atheism to say that that is the wrong path. Perhaps the only people who have surpassed Hitler in the horror of his crimes are the leaders of the various communist nations that the 20th century witnessed. Men like Joseph Stalin, who had millions of people die in the gulags of Siberia. Men like Pol Pot, who had about 1/3 of his fellow Cambodians killed in order to usher in his communist utopia. The tens of millions of people who died under Mao Zedong, starving to death in the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And the dictators of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, his son, Kim Jong-il, and the current leader, Kim Jong-un, who have had countless numbers of people die in prison camps, people who've just disappeared. Richard Wurmbrand was a pastor in Romania, and he spent some 14 years in prison because of his faith in Christ. 3 of those years were in solitary confinement. And during that time, he said that he heard a particularly brutal jailer say the following: "I thank God, in whom I don't believe, that I have lived to this hour when I can express all the evil that is in my heart." You see, on atheism, there is no objective purpose to life. There is no objective meaning. There is no objective morality. It's just meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Michael Roos, who was a philosopher at the University of Guelph, not far from Toronto where I grew up, and now he's at Florida State University. He's talked about the implications for morality on atheism, and he said, "Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory. I appreciate that when somebody says, 'Love thy neighbor as thyself,' they think they are revering above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory." On atheism, what are you are left with nihilism. No objective purpose, no objective meaning, no objective morality, and no real good or evil either. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, Solomon talks about how he saw so much suffering under the sun, how he saw people being oppressed and there was no one to comfort them. And he saw the tremendous evil in the world. And he said, for some people, it would be better if they were dead. Happier are those who are dead than those who are alive. A few months ago, you might recall that something like 21 Egyptian Christians were slaughtered by ISIS. They were beheaded. And I remember after that happened, an atheist friend of mine, he's British, but he lives in Korea. And I remember him posting on Facebook, and you could tell how upset he was. He said, "This is just so unjust. There cannot be a God, because if there was a God, he would prevent such a grave injustice." And I remember politely responding to him and saying, if there is no God, there is nothing like justice. Justice is just a matter of what you like and what you don't like. You see, there's 2 categories of terms we can use to apply to things in the world around us. In one category, you can talk about pain and suffering and sadness and sorrow. These are all just observations of what we see around us. But you can have another category of terms. You can talk about evil, wrong, tragedy, bad. These are not just observations of what we see. These are judgments about the way things should be. And essentially what these terms are saying is this is not the way the world is supposed to be. This is not the way that things should be. But what that means is if you're saying there's a way that things are not supposed to be, it also means that there is a way that things are supposed to be. But that only makes sense if there is some mind, some God that brought us into existence for a purpose. If we are here by accident and no mind brought us into existence, then there's no way that things are supposed to be. There's just meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I remember about a year ago when I was still in Korea, you might recall hearing about the ferry that sank, the Sewol. And I understand that there was an outpouring of grief, not just in Korea, but throughout the world. And as you listen to the news reports and the people commenting on it, I heard my Korean friends talk about just how much of a tragedy it was, how evil it was that these high school students should have died in that kind of a situation. But you know, if there was no mind, no God that created us to live a particular way, there's no such thing as a tragedy. There's just what you like and what you don't like. You might like to eat spaghetti and you don't like to eat broccoli. It's just a matter of your personal preferences. Tragedy, injustice, all of those terms are just expressions of what you don't like and nothing more. Atheists have a very hard time admitting this and acknowledging this, but once in a while they will acknowledge it. The famous, or perhaps infamous, Oxford atheist Richard Dawkins has written, "In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference." It's a very bleak world if you hold on to atheism. So bleak, in fact, that many people don't want to just create purpose in life, create meaning. They don't want to just create morality. They want to feel and they sense that morality and purpose and meaning in life is objective. It's not just something they've invented in their mind. So many times you will find people believe that there is some God out there that really does exist, not just in their minds, but external from their minds. But the interesting thing about this is for so many people, the God they believe in just happens to match all of their moral desires and preferences. And the God that they believe in just happens to match all of the morality and ideas that their society lives in. Listen to me. When the God that you believe in just happens to match everything that you want God to be and everything that your society wants God to be, you should seriously question whether that God is not simply a figment of your imagination. You see, if God really exists, he does not conform his morality, his desires and preferences to you. No, you have a responsibility to conform your beliefs, your desires, and your morality to him. Because he is the one that decides that, not you. Rosaria Champagne Butterfield was a professor of English literature and women's studies at Syracuse University. She was on her way to become a tenured professor, and she says that she was fervent for the world views of Freud, Hegel, Marx, and Darwin. She describes herself as a leftist lesbian professor who despised Christians. Christians were the type of people who'd quote a Bible verse to end a conversation, not to begin one. In 1997, she wrote an article for her local newspaper in which she talked about Promise Keeper, the Christian men's movement. And in that article, she attacked Jesus and the Republican Party and patriarchy. Unsurprisingly, she got a lot of letters in response. And all of them were either hate mail or love mail. So she put 2 boxes next to her desk. And all of the hate mail went into one box, and all of the love mail went into the other box. But then one day she got a letter that she couldn't categorize. It was from a local pastor. His name was Ken Smith, and he was pastor of the Syracuse Reformed Presbyterian Church. And he obviously didn't agree with her, but instead of hating her, he spent most of the letter asking her questions. He said, "How did you arrive at the conclusions that you arrived at? Why do you think the way that you think?" And he invited her to discuss these things some more, to come for dinner with him and his wife, Floy. Well, this letter didn't fit into one of the 2 boxes. She didn't know what to do with this, so she just threw it in the recycling bin. But over the course of that day, she thought about the letter, and at the end of the day, she fished that letter out of the recycling bin and decided to go visit Pastor Ken and his wife Floy. When she met Ken, she didn't find him matching her understanding of what evangelical Christians and the religious right were all about. She found that Ken could have sincere, honest dialogue with her about sexuality, about politics, and these conversations didn't seem to make him feel polluted or anything like that. They engaged in book exchanges where Ken would read one of her books and she would read one of his books. She said that she found a certain sincerity about him. When he prayed, he didn't pray like she expected. He would openly confess his sins to God there right in front of her. This was very different from her experience of Christians before. You see, as a lesbian professor, she had gone to gay pride parades. And while she would march around, she would see the Christians on the side with their placards. She says that it was clear as crystal blue sky that they were happy that she and all her friends were going to hell. Yet Ken wasn't like that. He didn't seem to delight in telling her that she was going to hell. Instead, he enjoyed having a friendship with her. At the same time as she was having this friendship with Ken, she was reading the Bible because she wanted to research the religious right. They seemed to be the enemies of everything that was good. In order to understand them, she had to read their holy book, the Bible. But she says that as she had this relationship with Ken and as she was reading the Bible, she felt that somehow it was just getting under her skin. One day, she was talking with one of her transgendered friends. And this friend said, Rosaria, this Bible reading, it's changing you. And almost she was shaking and said, what if it's all true? What if Jesus really did live and die and rise again? Well, all of this got to her, and one day on a Sunday morning, she got out of her bed and left her lesbian lover lying there. And she found herself in the pews of the Syracuse Reformed Presbyterian Church. She knew she stuck out. She had a short haircut, and she knew that the way she thought and acted did not jive with the people around her. But she longed for objective purpose, meaning, and morality in life. And as she thought about the cost of following Christ and the price that she would have to pay, she didn't like how the things added up. She didn't like what she found on the other side of that equal sign. But after a long period of time, she talks about the transformation that God had made in her life. And she says, one ordinary day, I came to Jesus, open-handed and naked. In this war of worldviews, Ken was there. Floy was there. The church that had been praying for me for years was there. Jesus triumphed. And I was a broken mess. Conversion was a train wreck. I did not want to lose everything that I loved. But the voice of God sang a sanguine love song in the rubble of my world. I weakly believed that if Jesus could conquer death, he could make right my world. I drank tentatively at first, then passionately of the solace of the Holy Spirit. I rested in private peace, then community, and today in the shelter of a covenant family where one calls me wife and many call me mother. You see, it's in the person of Jesus Christ that objective purpose, objective meaning, objective morality, and real objective good can be found. Apart from God, all you are left with is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Life consists of ups and downs. There's great pleasure and horrible pain. When we experience some horrible pain in life, some great evil, or we see someone else experiencing this great evil, we work to make sense of it all, and sometimes it just seems so meaningless. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, Solomon struggled with something else, because you see, sometimes in life, the only thing that can be worse than making sense of evil is experiencing all the pleasure that this world has to offer and finding it unfulfilling, finding it meaningless. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, Solomon talks about how he as a king sought the delights of a king's heart, all the pleasures of this world, how he acquired male and female slaves, how he planted fields and vineyards, how he filled his harem and acquired mountains of gold and silver. And after doing all of this, he said it was meaningless, just a chasing after the wind. George Sanders, after a lifetime of fame and fortune in Hollywood, went to a hotel outside of Barcelona, Spain. When he was there, he consumed 5 bottles of Nembutal. 2 days later, they found his dead body with a suicide note that said, "Dear world, I'm leaving you because I am bored. I feel I have lived long enough." Andre Agassi, the great tennis star, one day found himself having won Wimbledon and being the #1 tennis player in the world. And he describes in his autobiography how he felt. He said, "I did it. I'm the #1 tennis player on earth. And yet I feel empty. If being #1 feels empty, unsatisfying, what's the point?" You see, you can enjoy all the pleasure of this world and realize that this pleasure of this world does not produce meaning and purpose in your life. You can experience all of that pleasure and still realize, in the words of Solomon, that it's meaningless, just a chasing after the wind. So many people feel that if they can just escape the pain of this world and they can live forever, that somehow they will feel fulfilled. It's not true. Finite human beings, finite beings living in a finite universe will eventually do everything that can possibly be done, not just once, but 1,000,000 trillion times. And after doing 1,000,000 trillion times, it will be impossible to evade the meaninglessness of it all. Only an infinite God that can give us infinite delights and can create and has created us for some great and noble purpose can provide us with true and ultimate meaning that will never fade away. Paul Williams was a professor of Buddhism at the University of Bristol. He'd actually converted to Buddhism and practiced it for many years, convinced that it was true. One day he encountered some of the philosophers in his university, and they began a discussion with him because, you see, Buddhists do not affirm the existence of God. At best they say it's irrelevant, or worse, they deny God's existence. But these philosophers started to discuss things with him and talk about reasons to believe that God existed. And after a long period of time, he became convinced that God really did exist. And then the question was, who was this God that existed out there? And did any of the world's religions accurately describe this being? Paul Williams then investigated the historical arguments for Jesus' death and resurrection. And these arguments convinced him that Jesus really did live, that he really died, and he rose again. And eventually, he converted and became a Catholic Christian. When he describes some of the process of him becoming a Christian, he says one of the things that motivated him to become a Christian was the reality that within Buddhism you have endless, infinite cycles of death and reincarnation. And he says that on Buddhism, the significance of an individual human life converges on nothing. In his words, he says, from a Buddhist perspective, in the scale of infinite time, the significance of each of us as such, as the person we are, converges on nothing. For each of us lives our life and perishes. Each one of us, the person we are, is lost forever. Buddhism, for me, was hopeless. You see, you can reincarnate over and over again, but that doesn't mean that there's any purpose or meaning to the whole process of reincarnation. True meaning, true purpose in life, objective purpose, objective morality, objective good and evil, comes from a God, a mind that created us. And the Bible reveals to us that the reason why God created us is to glorify him by enjoying him forever. And we glorify God by worshiping him. One of the primaries we do it is by coming here on a Sunday morning and declaring his praises in the songs that we worship, the songs that we sing. But worship does not end on a Sunday morning. It goes throughout our week. Every single day of our life, we have the opportunity to glorify and worship the risen Christ. Ravi Zacharias, a great Indian intellectual, evangelist, and apologist who makes the case for this so persuasively. He talks about a friend of his, Thomas Squawk, who at one point in time was the 7th wealthiest person in the world. And Thomas once invited Ravi to come and speak to him and some of his mega rich colleagues. And while he was there, Ravi asked Thomas how he had become a Christian, because at the time he had only been a Christian for a year and a half. And Thomas says that one day he was sitting in his office and he called his wife and he said, "I have all this, but I am empty. I need something bigger. I think only God can help me." So that evening, him and his wife found a local church and they went inside and found people having a Bible study. It must have been a good Bible study because he went back the next week and the week afterwards. And by the 5th week, he had committed his life to Christ. You see, Thomas was looking for all kinds of pearls in life. But it wasn't until he found what Jesus described as the pearl of great price that he found true fulfillment in life. In the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon talks about all the things that he's done, all the things that he's seen under the sun. And at the end of this book, in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, he says this, "Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil." The Lord God is the only firm foundation for all of our hopes, for all of our dreams, for all of our aspirations. Everything else is just meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay them? For from him and through him and for him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen.